Thank you so much, Father Spitzer, and thank you to our friends at the Napa Institute and the Bush School of Business for giving us such a remarkable day. It's really a privilege to be here with you today on behalf of the Leonine Forum. We have about 40 Leonine Fellows at the conference today who are among our nearly 1,200 fellows in a national network. And a prevailing theme of our conversations today about this Catholic approach to artificial intelligence is a theme that is likewise constantly highlighted within the Leonine Forum, and that is the responsibility shouldered by current and future leaders who are formed in an adequate Christian anthropology. Another highlight within Leonine is our devotion to Pope Leo XIII's vision for Catholic social teaching. And so the past 5 months with our new Pope from America, who took the name Pope Leo XIV, has been a wonderful confirmation of the timeliness and importance of our mission at Leonine at this moment in time. The human person, as was mentioned this morning, is a co-creator in the Lord's vineyard. And on today's panel, we have 3 faithful laborers in 3 different rows of the vineyard. And I'll introduce each of them in turn before we dive into our conversation. Thomas Lehrman is the managing partner of Teamworthy Ventures. He's a formerly co-founder and former co-chief executive officer of Gerson Lehrman Group and has been involved as a founding or seed investor in numerous early-stage ventures. Thomas previously served as a director of the Office of WMD Terrorism at the State Department and as a member of the professional staff on the President's WMD Commission. Mr. Lehrman has been a board member of several educational institutions around the New York area and is a graduate of Duke University and Yale Law School. Your program notes Abby Warren as a panelist. She is a federal employee, and unfortunately her participation was impacted by the current government shutdown. And so in her stead, we're very grateful to welcome Rick Huff to this panel, who is chairman and chief executive officer of Silvercrest Asset Management Group. Rick joined Silvercrest in 2003 and has served on the firm's executive committee since 2007. Mr. Huff was Silvercrest president and chief operating officer from 2010 to 2013. He's a former member of the Board of Governors and executive committee of the Investment Advisor Association and serves as chairman of the board of the Institute for Family Studies and the National Civic Arts Society. He serves on the boards of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, New York Men's Leadership Forum, Christendom College, and the advisory board of the New Criterion. He received a BA in Politics and Philosophy from Princeton University. Our third panelist today is Dr. Chao Feng, Principal AI Scientist at Pathomic and a New York City Leonine Fellow. He's passionate about developing new AI systems that help realize the full potential of the growing amount of digitized healthcare data, building the future of personalized medicine, and working with gigabyte-scale medical image data sets. Chao holds a PhD from Weill Cornell Medical School with a concentration in computational pathology. And in his doctoral thesis, he focused on creating novel ways to characterize the tumor microenvironment based on whole slide histopathology images using deep learning methods to utilize them to predict cancer diagnoses and clinical outcomes. So as you can see, we have a real professional diversity today, so let's dive in. And I'd like to begin, Thomas, with you. So we can queue up a slide deck, please, while I pose this question. Thomas, the ability to make quick decisions in a rapidly changing environment, often when lives are at stake, is at the core of a successful security and national defense initiative. Your organization, Teamworthy Ventures, has been on the front lines of investing in organizations working in these rapidly developing industries. So my question for you is, how will AI implementation improve them without removing the human element?
Well, that's a great tee up for just a few slides. Thank you so much. It's also a real blessing to be on the panel with my friend Rick Huff. I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the use cases in national security and defense and some of the things we work on. And I think specifically this question, which a lot of people refer to as, how do you keep the human in the loop in critical decisions involving high consequence issues? Just a little bit of background on our firm. These are 4 companies that we are investors with, partners with, support. Each of them in their own way is exploring or developing use cases in national security or defense that have an AI dimension to it. The first one on the upper left is a company called Reliable Robotics. They are engaged in autonomous flight systems, and in fact, they're developing the autonomous flight systems for the Boeing C-135 tanker. So imagine tankers flying through the air autonomously. The first step, of course, is the ability to either assist the current pilots or to augment them from the ground. Perry Labs, on the upper right, they develop modular open system software that goes on drones, and the platform that they've enabled enables third-party services like AI services to actually feed into drones to enable drone swarms and next generation configurations of drones for either special operations missions or other kinds of activities, whether those are in terrorism type operations or in sort of larger fields of battle. And then Shift 5 is a company that provides systems that sit on the electronics of aircraft and allow them to detect anomalies in the electronics of the aircraft. And they use a lot of machine learning to figure out whether or not those aircraft have been hacked. Also, it's very useful in preventive maintenance. So commanders in the field can actually know when a particular aircraft needs to be maintained or go into the shop. And then the last one is Astari Digital, which is run by Dr. Will Roper, perhaps the most interesting of the four. Actually just spoke to Dr. Roper yesterday. He's developing the digital engineering environment for next generation aviation aircraft and also vehicles. What do I mean by that? Today, if you commission a new aircraft in the United States Air Force, it takes about 10 to 15 years to go from start to finish. Their whole idea is to compress that down to under a year, or certainly under 2 years, by bringing all of the design, testing, and certification into a digital environment. So those are just a few quick use cases. And then I wanted to just talk a little bit about the question prompt, which Emma asked me about, which is really how do we, as we think about all these AI's use cases, what's a useful framework for thinking about what's going on in the military decision-making context? I think one of the most important thinkers in this area is Colonel Boyd, the U.S. Air Force colonel in the 1950s. Some of you may be familiar with him in the context of strategy. Military strategy, a lot of his ideas have actually been percolating into the fields of grand strategy and more broadly business strategy. But his basic concept is that in the military and also in other contexts, the decision-making is really it's not a linear process. It's an iterative loop of decision-making that one undertakes. It begins with observation. It then moves to orientation. You can think of observation as bringing in all the sense information that you need. So obviously augmenting the ability to observe with next generation sensors can be a huge deal in AI systems. Orientation is, well, what do you actually do with all that information? And that's where some of the AI models would sit. And then the decide piece is really, okay, are we going to allow the machine to decide in this context? Or is a human person going to make the decision? And I'll talk about the framework that's probably going to be useful for asking or figuring out when humans actually sit in that decision-making loop in an AI decision-making context. And then the last piece is what he refers to as act. Again, but it's an iterative loop, and each time you act, you elicit new information from the environment, which takes you back through the same loop. So the new information that you elicit, then you observe, and then you orient around that new information, you decide, and you act again. It's a little bit like the way the Marines talk about as you go out into the field, the encounter with the enemy elicits new information. Moving quickly along, another defense use case some of you may be interested is sort of top of mind right now is how can AI be used in the context of wargaming? This is particularly interesting in that we may not have an adequate stock of scenarios in the public domain to actually train models against. So it's a really interesting area for humans to contribute to next generation models. How can humans actually imagine new scenarios that are not, in fact, codified today or involve new information that's coming to light as we speak? You can imagine new information, for example, in the Pacific Theater or, for that matter, in a terrorist operation. This is one of my provocative questions of the day for this audience, and would love to hear either thoughts or questions after. But my question is, did Binet's intelligence test, Alfred Binet was a psychologist who developed the IQ test, and did John Boyd's OODA loop draw on Aquinas? And so here we can see how the observe, orient, decide, act framework can be linked back to what is sometimes referred to as Thomistic action theory, where you're sensing and apprehending, then the intellect is engaging in reason, understanding and judgment, and then the will, of course, is choosing or the deciding, and the reaction is the fight. But I think what's interesting is to think about what do we mean when we use the word intelligence? Is it a process? Often in the military context or the intelligence community context, we think about collections of information, human intelligence, open source intelligence, SIGINT, signals intelligence. But if John Boyd is right, what we're really talking about is a cycle. It's an iterative loop, and we can reach back to Aquinas for some inspiration on what the steps are in that loop. One final thought on how to think about this question, when the human goes in the loop. I think all of us are concerned about AI systems running amok, whether that's directing a drone in such a way that it might elicit a terrible response and maybe even cause World War III, or for that matter, might result in innocent casualties of civilians. So, of course, the human has to be in the loop. I think the issue that we're finding is that the AI systems that are being developed by the Chinese and others are beginning to incorporate decision-making into them. And so I think what we really need, in addition to what we have in the Department of Defense, which is a set of sort of ethical principles or principles for ethical use of AI, is a risk management framework. And the way to think about it is, or one way to think about it is hallucinations were talked about earlier, that's just errors, is what's the consequence or the potential consequence of an AI error? And if the potential consequence, even the probability is small, that usually means a human's going to have to be in the loop to avoid a decision that would lead to either unexpected outcomes or, for that matter, strategic miscalculation on the part of the enemy. And I'll just stop there. That's just a simple framework, though, that links the OODA loop and sort of risk management thinking into how we apply AI in the defense context, while at the same time making sure that we're protecting Catholic ethical principles.
Thank you, Thomas. Hopefully we'll be able to come back to both the OODA loop and St. Thomas. Now let's turn to you, Rick. My leadoff question for you is a simple one, and that's, in your estimation, how is AI shaping the world of financial advising and investment management, and then how will it continue to do so?
It's doing it in 3 or 4 different ways. First is endemic to all institutions that have processes, which you heard a bit about with Thomas. And I with that great introduction, I'll be able to use a lot of shorthand because I thought it was a great framework. Any process that requires mass quantities of information, data, et cetera, are going to be accelerated in terms of their organization and usefulness on behalf of the humans acting on that data like any other industry. And the quantitative data in our business is overwhelming and hard to get your arms around. So we'll just speed up the part that gets you to analysis of portfolios, a quantitative understanding of what is happening with different securities, to the operational side, which requires a lot of human intervention and work that can be taken over ultimately by machines to both manipulate it, make it understandable, and to organize it on behalf of the professionals who then add creative value. The second way that I see it really affecting our industry is potentially in the enhancement of human relationships. Not something we often think about with AI, but to the extent that it can displace automated work that requires input and output and manipulation by a human, the more human beings are freed up to spend their time on their higher order creative decision-making and work on behalf of portfolios and clients. That involves both machine learning, a branch of AI, which I'll give you an example of, as well as other forms of AI, even using large language models. With regards to, for example, machine learning, like the airplane or other machines that you were talking about, you have a constant assessment of the inputs of how it is performing that can then be corrected or to catch things in advance. For example, very advanced engine monitors now are sampling what is happening in each cylinder by the microsecond, and the machine learning can understand when, say, a valve is going to fail. It can't tell you how it knows that. It's just pulled together all the aggregated data around failing valves and can identify this one's a problem. And then a human or other intervention can be taken. Likewise, it can take mass amounts of information with regards to people's actions, how they're trading, what they're calling in about. Let's say they go into our portfolio management system to see a report on how their investments are performing. It's predictable. Perhaps they do it every Tuesday. What if the machine is learning a pattern that this person is now running different reports and is running it on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon and Saturday morning? Like a failing cylinder, perhaps there's a notification to a portfolio manager who must work with another human being to say, you should give this person a call and figure out what's wrong. We have to intuit that now, but actually there are ways for artificial intelligence to help heighten our awareness in relationships. That's just one tiny example. Most excitingly, I think, is if it saves us from ourselves organizing and manipulating data, it allows us to apply creativity, which is where anyone in any role, but in particular in our business, adds value. And that is where I want to get more into reasoning, understanding, judging, and therefore what you were imposing on it. Because the real hazard is not just how AI is choosing and navigating the information that is ultimately delivered through its algorithms, but how is it constrained? In what way are those constraints disclosed? What is the audit channel to assure the correct principles are applied? Those are massive questions. But secondly, like any new technology that makes our lives easier, how do you retain a very sharp creative edge when so much of what you have done heretofore, where you added value or thought you did, is taken away? It's very easy to become lazy. How do you incentivize and teach your partners and employees to then add value as a human?
All right, we'll come back to that as well. Chow, let's turn now to you and your work in healthcare. And I'd like to ask you about the pace of development of AI, particularly in research and medicine, and how that might compare to AI innovation more broadly.
Thank you. We have seen a lot of AI innovations in different areas presented by the speakers today, including the examples that the two speakers here has showed us, and most of us have experienced the fast-paced development of AI in the past few years through ChatGPT or seeing videos made from deepfake, etc. And of course, these technologies they build on decades of development works in computer science, but it really seems like their performance or maybe the impressiveness has really picked up speed in the last few years due to advancement in both algorithms and hardware. And when it comes to healthcare, I would say there are still many different areas how we use AI in healthcare. And I would like to just talk about specifically the particular area that is most relevant to my own work, which is to the application of AI to large-scale biomedical data, such as genomics data, medical imaging, and clinical health record, etc., to solve various different kind of clinical or pharmaceutical problems, this including diagnosis of disease, finding biomarkers that can predict the patient's response to a particular treatment in order to help clinicians to make clinical decisions, or finding new therapeutical targets and design new drugs, etc. And so the AI method we use in these applied to these large biomarker data is not very different from the method used in other areas. And we do still use classical statistical methods like linear regression. We cannot forget about those things because they are very effective. But maybe when it comes to methods that are maybe in these days are more qualified to be called AI, like deep neural network, the underlying mathematical structure really is very similar, whether it's applying to AI or other industries. So I would say the fast-paced development of AI as a whole does also speed up the development of AI, particularly in healthcare. And there are many of these healthcare innovations has been deployed in the clinic to various extent and making a difference there. And my own company, we use AI to look for biomarkers in routine cancer tissue images from the surgical sample or biopsy of cancer patients, in order to help mostly oncologists to make better treatment decisions for their patients. And we have seen various promising results, and we have developed clinical tests that is in various stages of being available in the clinic. But I would say for a couple reasons, I would say that overall the development of AI in this particular area of healthcare is slower compared to AI innovation as a whole, for good reason. One is the biological system is complex. The patient outcome, the predictability of patient outcome is limited. Of course, if we can find any signal from whether it's cancer images or genomics, then if we can really make a difference in clinical decision making, then it is good news. But a lot of these AI models needs to be rigorously validated on clinical data, and that could take years. And another aspect is, oftentimes these deep neural networks are what we call black box model, which is like the example Rick just mentioned about finding faulty vaults using machine learning, is that we don't necessarily know exactly why the AI make a particular prediction. And that might be fine in other areas when you have other mechanisms to ensure safety. But when it comes to the clinic, the physicians, they probably oftentimes they are reluctant to make a decision if they don't know what kind of knowledge the AI is dependent on to make this prediction. So part of my research is actually to develop interpretable AI, which is to find a way to somehow transform the features that are identified in AI to real biological knowledge. And as a Catholic, and I really agree with what Father Spitzer said in the morning. Ultimately AI models is no matter how advanced it is just a sophisticated statistical model that you fit your data to, and the real work of understanding and reasoning can only be done by a human intellect. And so as a scientist, doing science with and without AI, certainly there is a difference. But the essence of what we're doing remains the same, and understanding cause will always be important in biomedical and clinical applications. So for that reason, like any other science, it does take time to develop AI, because ultimately the tool we're developing is to help clinicians to make better decisions to treat a patient, not to treat patients as a statistical data point, which is what AI does to its data. So.
Thank you very much, Chao. Rick, I'd like to pose my next question to you, and then if either of the other panelists would like to chime in, you'd be welcome to do so. Rick, I want to pick up on what you were saying a moment ago about some of the challenges to human creativity, and ask you that in that climate, and as a leader of a company, how do you continue to emphasize the good things that make creativity possible? Personal relationships, cultivating talent, and cultivating virtue in your employees. What does that look like for you in your work?
Several different things. Number one is to emphasize those things in a workplace or in your interaction with your colleagues that make us uniquely human. It's not exchanging email, it's encouraging picking up the phone and talking to people, it's visiting. My office, unlike many, encourages people to be in the office as often as possible. This physical contact, we could do this virtually, right? We could all be on a screen. But it's nice to break out, talk to each other, encounter each other. We get so much more as humans absorbing somebody in the flesh than we do on a screen, which flattens emotion, flattens a lot of things. As useful and efficient as it is, it does hide something about the human. Number one. Number two, principles. the company, our organizations, whatever they may be, have to be based on certain understood, shared principles of behavior and what you're about, a shared purpose to what you're doing, not an amalgamation of drones who are living in a silo, independent of each other and working only for their own good. It needs to be oriented towards principles that are working on behalf of the good of the whole. With regards to AI in particular and human creativity, it means, and I know Thomas does this and does this with his partner. He's really good at it. But it means hiring and seeking out people who are working with you who are fundamentally curious, right? That leads to creativity. If you're not curious, you're not going to understand perhaps the theory behind the black box, which is incredibly important. Backgammon and chess, I've been talking to a colleague about this, have basically been broken by neural networks. All of the possible positions of very constrained models, there are rules, are known. And AI has revolutionized how those games are played completely. Totally changed strategy. The problem is it can't tell you how or why. It takes humans to look at it and say, okay, what's the theory here? Why is that the best mood in this pattern? People who fundamentally share our values, who care about principles, who very often have degrees in humanistic lines of study, or at least augmented by it, have that curiosity. And it needs to be encouraged in the workplace. People need to be allowed to make mistakes, which we have less and less tolerance for, in order to learn from and continue to push the boundaries of our knowledge and the use of tools. Finally, there needs to be an open culture within a company, I would argue, of letting people play with AI and not artificially constraining it, letting people use it in their jobs and adapt it, and having people talk about it and its use cases. Because otherwise people are going to adopt it and keep it over here like it's something bad. And if you're not engaged with it in a social way and pressing people on how it's useful or not, or what you're bringing to the table, you can end up with people who are fundamentally becoming lazy, and what you're actually getting is a mean derived by an algorithm rather than understanding that you can add value to.
Would either of you care to weigh in on that, Thomas or Chow?
I'll just add briefly, one of the things we spend a lot of time at Teamworthy doing is what we call customer research. It's not particularly original, but if you do it in the right way, it elicits tremendous insights. And what do I mean by that? Well, whenever we are approaching a particular investment, we want to understand what's the customer context. Sometimes those conversations, as Rick was talking about, real conversations with a person who's situated as a user or a customer of a particular product or service, it branches in very unpredictable ways. You know, you start out with an idea that, okay, this is a customer of this company, and then by the end of it, you realize there are 3 other interesting companies or 2 other technologies that are more important that you should be spending more time on. So I do think when we think about creativity, we also have to think about the kind of human relationships we put ourselves into. And customer relationships are often a really important setting for that. Sometimes college students ask me for advice on what they should do to become more creative, or the last year there. And I say, well, put yourself in a different institutional context. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the things we've noticed is a lot of times college students will have apps for things like exchanging college wear, or things that are associated with a typical use case of a college student. But if they go work in a research laboratory at the university, suddenly they're going to understand a whole different set of challenges and opportunities facing users that's different from an undergraduate student. It's a researcher. You're working as an apprentice to a senior researcher. Oh, what do labs need to buy? What do they need? So putting yourself into different institutional contexts is also, I think, another source for creativity, especially for young people who often have just been in families, schools, and maybe summer camps. So they can get themselves inside of a research laboratory or a startup company, maybe out working as an intern or an associate in a hospital. Suddenly new ideas come out of that, or new startup concepts come out of those experiences of real world challenges in those other institutional contexts.
Great, thank you. Thomas, I'm going to stay with you for this next question. You spoke about the OODA loop in the specific context of defense and security, and I'd like to ask you to pick up that theme and then apply it to a more broad, business and finance, fintech setting that might be of interest to many people in the room.
Well, at the risk of veering too much into Chow's terrain, one of our portfolio companies, a company called Imogen, is a company focused on musculoskeletal radiology. And one of the things that was interesting to us about the company's been in existence now probably for about 10 years. What's interesting about that is they amassed an enormous corpus of radiological images. But it wasn't just the image data. It wasn't just the information, so to speak, there that was important to the business and this kind of observe, orient, decide, act loop. It was also the labeling that had to be done by skilled physicians at hospital special surgery. So you had to have an expert, a human, interacting with the raw data to label it so that the machine learning could actually be done well. And then even after that, once the machine runs, and it identifies, oh, here's a little lesion, or here's something on this scan that you might have missed. The machine is not making the decision. The physician is still saying, okay, yeah, thanks for helping me find that. Thanks for putting a little marker on the scan. You sped my process up. So the physician is still very much in the decision-making loop. It's just they can do these 3, 4, 5 times faster, and you can do it with a much lower risk of non-detection. So that would be a concrete example of kind of AI, machine learning in the context of medicine and healthcare.
Great, thank you. Chow, I have a question for you, which is how your work and your use of AI in your work has been affected by optimal work. So Optimal Work, as many of you may know in the room, about Optimal Work and its co-founder, Kevin Majors. But for those who might be unfamiliar, Chow, would you please briefly explain what that is and then describe its usefulness for you in this particular aspect?
Sure. Yeah. So Optimal Work is a program that I use to help me work better. It is composed mostly of lectures, courses, short courses by mostly Dr. Majors and online programs that teaches me to reframe the tasks in my work as a service to others, as a context where I can grow in ideals or virtue by training my attention and develop strategies to challenge myself in my work. And when it comes to AI, I think Optimal Work mainly serves as a safeguard to kind of remind myself what the purpose of my work is. As I mentioned, I do develop AI for specific cases in healthcare, but I also use AI myself in my daily work. I use AI as a co-pilot for coding, and as a scientist, I do brainstorm with my colleague all the time, but sometimes I do find ChatGPT to be useful for quickly bouncing off some ideas. But sometimes I have to check myself, do I go immediately to AI for specific tasks because I just found it boring? Or do I feel like I'm spared having to talk to, bother my colleague just because I can get some quick answers from ChatGPT? So this is where I work at the fast-paced startup, and I should not I could not use this tool, and I need not to refuse to use this tool. But I think I heard this from a talk by Sister Anna Ray, who is a professor of philosophy at Catholic University of America. She's my favorite Thomistic Institute speaker, by the way. But in this talk, she said, like any other tools, AI is a tool, and you should remember you're not limited by what the tool can do, but what you can do as a human being. And also, in the case of company, it also is limited by what you guys can do as a company. So I use Optimal Work because it really helps me to develop a strategy to pay attention to what is most important in my work, which is the virtues that I can grow through this work and my bonds with others that is created in this work. And of course, we do want to do good science and eventually help the patients. But I know that that's not ultimately depends on our effort, and certainly it should not depend on AI. So,
Thank you. Did you either
Yeah,
want
I
to weigh
had
in?
two
Please,
things.
please.
I just want to respond to both, actually. I love Thomas's answer for advice to young people. Mine is to read a lot of literature as well. That's number one when people ask me what they can do to advance their career when they're 20 years old. I think you touched on something that may come up, but it's so important, which is when I mentioned discussing the use of AI and how it's being used and being open about it in order to prompt creativity is extraordinarily important, because aside from, let's say, the aggregated data that's used in a machine learning for, a black box answer, which were two examples we gave, there can be a great shortcut that saves time to help with researching a problem, distilling thoughts, et cetera. Going to ChatGPT is one example. I do the same. However, the reason it's important to discuss and understand where it enters your decision-making process in the way Thomas was talking about it, which is a very clear process, but now we're talking about open-ended thought in terms of direction, is that as soon as you've gone to it, you've been directed to what the results of the most highly statistical probabilistic answer is given the inputs, which is defined already by the body of knowledge it's drawing from. It's not new. And it comes into our brain. And we are the sum of our experiences, relationships, and ideas that have been from. You cannot come at whatever you're working on fresh again. It's been planted. The direction has been set. So taking a very considered view of when you go to AI for more open issues, not process-oriented issues, I think is absolutely critical to fostering the creativity I was talking about.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask one last wrap-up question before we turn the microphone over to the attendees today. And so I'll start with you, Thomas, and then turn to you, Rick, and then finish with you, Chow. And so my question is, what's one piece of advice that you might offer either to a senior or executive decision maker or perhaps to a more junior and rising leader? What's one thing that that person might keep in mind when implementing AI in their workplace?
This is a hard one. I think the thing that I was most struck by, I've been very frustrated recently by people telling me in their organizations that AI is making our developers so productive, we don't need to hire junior developers anymore. And I think that is absurd. But I was struggling for a reason. Why is that absurd? And why was I think part of me was thinking, well, that's perhaps maybe just my sympathetic or charitable view. But I think the CEO of AWS, Amazon Web Services, recently commented, I think, on the same concept. And really what it does is it underestimates the capacity for the adaptability and creativity of young people to take these tools in directions we can't anticipate in very positive ways. And it also, I think, to a certain extent, can reinforce a certain tendency of laziness among people who are already in the organization, already established in their position, and maybe at times feel threatened by the up-and-coming talent coming out of universities. We're always struck by how much young people can accomplish if they're given some goals, given a few projects. It's remarkable. We have young people sourcing new investment ideas during internships with us that we actually invest in. So anyway, I think that idea that AI is eliminating the need for entry-level developers is completely false. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on why that's false. Like, how can I articulate reasons for that beyond what I've already said?
That is such a good answer that I have trouble actually coming up with something better. But I would basically just be repeating myself that the cautionary principle for me is really just how you are using it to further your work. The work of process, great. The work of identifying and defining problems, great. But I think the biggest warning sign to anyone would be, well, how is it you add creative value to what that is, and when do you use it appropriately? But what I was really struck by your comment, Thomas, and the next generation, which is absolutely critical in an organization, I should probably have put on my list of principles, is, and I wish I could remember who it was probably Aristotle, that effectively education is procreation, right? And another term for procreation. And unless you are cultivating within this the next generation on how to work with and use these tools, you will lose the human creative edge that makes any business, which is really what we're talking about, thrive and worthwhile and innovative, but human existence itself.
In truth, I haven't really been in the workforce for long enough to give any advice, but I would say from my own experiences, maybe when a company decides to implement AI on a large scale, we should not always maybe focus on the measurement of efficiency, but also consider the human element. Like in my own work, I sometimes as a scientist to find the best word, and English is not my first language, but to be able to find the precise words to communicate an idea, for example, in an email or in a conversation, that kind of has some kind of joy associated with it. And I have to often realize my tendency to go to ChatGPT immediately, kind of taking that away. And once it's gone, like I don't even remember, I don't even realize that how important that is to me. So I think there are measurement, which is out of my expertise, but a measurement, we can measure the efficiency of company, but there's definitely a human element, a personal perspective that should be considered.
In a way, you can't lose the craft of what you're all about, because we learn by doing. So let's take the scans. Like image recognition is absolutely astounding. It's pattern recognition AI can do. But at the end of the day, if you want to have human interaction, interpretation, a human has to be able to do it too. It can't just be told what the image is. Well, there's only one way to do that as a human, which is to actually practice and do it. And a craft itself, it's true of investing, is fulfilling in and of itself and teaches us in a way that AI cannot teach us because it's just delivering.
Just two quick book recommendations I'd give to that anonymous executive that we find useful. One is, I spoke about customer research. I think Steve Blank's work, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and some of his other work is just outstanding. I think anybody who's in business, ultimately the question has to be, how am I serving my customer? Or how am I serving customers that I don't even realize I should be serving? And his methodology of customer research and customer discovery, I think, really is the gold standard. The other book is the book Who by Jeff Smart. And Jeff says that one of the biggest problems executives face is they spend too much time thinking about the what of their work instead of who. Who is on your team that's going to get the what done? And he's got a lot of really good little playbooks in there for how to interview people, how to think about making sure that the person you're speaking with is actually the person you think you're getting. So those would be 2 pieces of book advice. Again, it's all about human relationships, relationships with your customers and relationships with your team.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. All right, we have time for questions from our attendees. Helen will bring the microphone to you.
I'll address this question to Chao, since you work in a medical field. Have you given thought to the prospect of fraudulent data or making just data from nowhere and then passing it off as like this is a promising result that we should be looking into? Because I think that's always there for a scientist, that there's a trust in a scientist that they're just presenting the data as it is. We look to see if they have the right question asked and whether they're doing the right tests to answer that. But it seems like when you put in AI, there's this whole new ability to generate data from nowhere there. Have you given any thought to that?
I would say that even before AI, biomedical research in general, there's always kind of problem with reproducibility. I don't want to make it sound like it's a bigger problem than it is, but there are, from a statistical perspective, there could be people argue there are problems with p-values, and it's very easy to hack p-values to make a result appear to be more significant than it actually is. And with AI, I don't, to my knowledge, it hasn't been that much of a problem, a significant problem, but maybe I'm a little bit out of loop. I would say that, yeah, I haven't really thought about it too much, but there's, like I said, it's always a problem in scientific research of whether your result is reproducible or not. I think maybe one way to think about this is how we can actively check the research result, and how does that affect, especially when it comes to the clinic, all of whatever the AI model we're building needs to be rigorously validated in the clinical data. So how can we make sure, and sometimes these products doesn't need FDA approval because oncologists just, they look at your validation result, they could say, okay, this is, I can trust this, I can use this to make decisions for my patients. So it is important to make sure that all these results are correct. Yeah, I think there are mechanisms, committees and stuff that is in place for these. But for scientific community as a whole, I think maybe eventually we'll have to do something to make sure whatever we read in the literature is trustworthy. Yeah.
Other questions? We have a few in the back then, Helen. Go ahead.
Thank you guys for a wonderful, engaging panel today. My name is Chris Raybeck. As a real estate developer, I deal with a lot of deals that have very sensitive information. And so kind of going off of, all of you guys are in industries, whether it's patient information, client portfolio, or, investment deals, the idea of playing with AI and how there's definitely ways to use it in the investment making process and in the analysis to enhance your processes with that and make investment decisions. But how do you kind of balance that sensitivity of either deal information or just information that you're entering with the ability to have the rest of your team kind of playing with and experimenting with AI?
That's a great question, because obviously a lot of what we're dealing with is extremely sensitive, even if it's just the trading of a security. Two things. Number one is the small amount of outside ChatGPT, LLM use that is seeding and then used again by AI is probably very, 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 very small amongst all of the information it's drawing from, so pretty hard to get the signal from the noise. However, we ourselves have rules about information that may be used or shared. So there are internal guidelines about use, which is why you want to talk about it and have it very open. And that is a concern I have, that too many people are just kind of, oh, it's this thing over here. And therefore, you're not actually answering and dealing with questions like you have. We don't want to seed certain information out there. In which case, if it's being used with internal models that are not connected to the outside world. In fact, you could get a hologram, if you're just talking about general use, large language model, but it serves for anything, of just about everything ever published on the internet. Have it local as a hologram, and the LLM will still work to come out with the most likely statistical answer and drive it, believe it or not even being online, and very efficiently. But the real answer for that is sandbox.
It's a great question. It's one I think Mark Ryland might know something about. I was in fact going to ask Mark a couple questions on, can I trust Amazon's infrastructure with some of our sensitive Gong call recordings that we do with entrepreneurs? But that's a very real question. You've got all this video information and transcripts and other information. Where does that go? And can your rest of your team leverage that for just research purposes? Or for that matter, when you have a new person joining the team, can they get the institutional knowledge much more quickly through that? So these are really critical questions. Arguably, it's probably better, although we're still trying to figure it out, and that's why Mark can maybe be helpful. Some of the enterprise licenses and the terms and conditions of enterprise GPT and other capabilities, you have more privacy and protection there. We also have a portfolio company, a company called Virtru, which is developed something called the trusted data format. And they've been doing research in and around how do you have some of the capabilities around searchability of data while still protecting the data with encryption and other methodologies around security. But great question. I don't know that we have the right answer, but I do think a lot of the AI companies, the GPT companies, are developing these kinds of frameworks that allow you to be confident that the information won't leak. But I think Rick's point is, like, until you're confident, you should probably do it in small amounts. And to a certain extent, some of the most sensitive stuff you may just want to do locally for the time being.
I want to add that it's in their self-interest, as Thomas was saying, to provide models that work in a way that potentially protect what we're after. That we are the customer. You want to listen to the customer. I would also flip this question on its head, which is the other way, which is the disclosure and understanding of the rules of the algorithm to get to its answer. What are the weights? What are the primary weighted sources? Is it merely what is ubiquitous, or are certain sources, features on the internet, which I'm using loosely for the term data, weighted more heavily and trusted than others? And what does that mean? And for us, trying to lead our companies and think about our faith and Catholic principles, that's really critical, because we as Catholics aren't writing those rules. We're not the ones determining the weights in those algorithms to provide intelligible answers. That is a big quandary for us. How do we rely on the tools the other way?
I mean, just one really quick follow-up. I remember the day when Google basically launched, and I went and did my first Google search. And I was absolutely astounded. At the time, I was building a startup business. We were connecting investors to expert consultants. And I was amazed you could find all these experts with just a quick Google search. Well, now you just do ChatGPT and you say, okay, give me 20 people who've received NSF grants in the last year working in radiology. And boom, you get a list of all the people. It's like it's pulled all of the internet up and out of the links and right into the interface. So I feel like a similar level of breakthrough around just this question of like people discovery, like finding people that are relevant to the area of interest. So
and yet, sorry to go on at this, it was such a good question. And yet, when we did those Google searches, it was kind of raw. Now we know when you do a Google search, it's curated and ordered, and advertising and word flow all matters. And so you kind of, are you getting what you actually want, or is it something you're not fully aware of that is being served up to you? The same thing threatens to happen or is happening with these large language models, with effectively black box algorithms we don't fully understand in terms of their probabilistic outcomes.
Hello. Thank you so much for the panel discussion. I really appreciate it. One thing I've been curious about are Black Swan events. So one of the reasons why we don't have autonomous driving vehicles, at least to the extent that we have expected at this point, is because the cars aren't prepared to behave during certain extremely unlikely events. So it's pretty good at changing lanes, doing turns and stuff, because 95% of the time, that's what you typically experience. But then you have the extremely rare situations that the data that it's trained on is not prepared for. So if there's a tree down the middle of that is down and lands on the middle of the highway, the AI is not prepared for that because it's not in their database. So based off of the idea that you're limited to what data you put into the AI and that what comes out, how do you prepare for black swan or very unlikely events in your when you're training your data sets?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think I'd also frame it slightly differently, which is what are the consequences of a black swan event? Meaning, like if a autonomously driven car or autonomous car is driving down and it can't figure something out, what does it do? Well, it typically stops, right? And then, at least my understanding is that Google has some form of, or Waymo has some form of reach back to a human operator, right? And usually it's not a catastrophic outcome. Now, there can be a situation in an autonomous car algorithm where the car is making a decision of whether to avoid a car or avoid the biker in the bike lane, right? And how do you decide what to put in the algorithm such that you're making an ethical choice between those two? Now, that's a very difficult question to answer. But I think the bigger question, I think, on the black swan is, and relates to whether or not AI should even be making decisions in those situations, is imagine another scenario where the outcome of the black swan is a catastrophic event. Namely, imagine a missile flying through the air that somehow malfunctions, or some other weapon system. So I think that's part of it. Is it's not just thinking about the probability of these events, but the likely consequences should the black swan event actually take place. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Just a little anecdote. I was in China in the spring and visited an autonomous trucking company. They have several hundred autonomous semi-trucks on the road there for their internal economy. These are not for export. And there's a human driver. The data to deal with what you were talking about, and just that one black swan event, or event it can't quite handle, is so consistently and constantly gathered and upgraded that I would dare say, in fact, I saw examples of this at the tree falling in the middle of the road, although your example is not really a problem. But I would just ask the question, this gets to Thomas's point about consequences. Is it really the goal to replace the driver, or is it to accomplish something else? And related to the efficiency, say, of trucking. And it was quite remarkable because it's very clear that, contrary to what you may think, drivers themselves vastly preferred it, to be watching over this and part of the process in the middle of the OODA loop. It's much less fatiguing. There is a lot less turnover in drivers who are very skilled, actually, and very expensive to train up, and a problem in the industry. Insurance rates go down, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually, you've provided a good example with, due to some unfortunate outcomes that an algorithm may or may not be able to deal with, but I would argue increasingly will. Every drive gathers data. It also has the effect of actually upgrading someone's position in the decision making, as part, because so many automated parts of the job is no longer relying on the human, and the human is adding that extra value of security or safety.
Hello. Slightly similar question. I was wondering your thoughts when you talked about why hiring junior developers. I thought back to the cost of supervision of automated systems rising with both volume of automation and complexity of automation. And that's not really new to AI. You know, I work in financial tech, and that's something that with high-frequency trading we deal with a lot. I'm curious your thoughts about how do you test AI, which is often a non-deterministic system. So it's like your volume of automation goes up. In traditional software systems, we can run batteries of tests and gain high levels of confidence on its reliability of a specific type of outcome. But in highly sensitive situations, like I said, it's similar to driving, but I was looking at it from the trading and wealth management perspective as well. Happy to keep this one brief if the comments are similar to what we're talking about with the automated drivers. But how do you test these systems to make sure you can trust the output in sensitive systems?
I'm not the authority on this one.
Thank you for stumping the panel.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll have to talk about that one at the coffee break, perhaps. I think we can do one more question. Okay, Helen over here on your left. Yep. There on the end. There we go.
Thanks. A couple quick thoughts. First, on the driving, autonomous driving, the question is not whether the systems will make errors; it's whether they make errors at a lower rate than humans do. Right. So, even catastrophic results might be acceptable if they're at a lower rate than humans. So, and that applies to a lot of these use cases as well. But going back to the question about, and I'll try to generalize this, not to turn this into an ad for AWS, but we do respond to customer requirements, and we do build systems where our privileged operators cannot see customer data at all. And we build technical controls that make it impossible. In fact, one of the reasons why we have this AI service called Bedrock, one of the reasons it's very popular in the enterprise space is because we make a set of guarantees about we cannot see your prompts and the responses. We can log them for you if you want to see them, but we can't see them. And we create network boundaries around the models such that there's no phone home behavior. So for example, when DeepSeek was released, all the researchers used Bedrock to play around with it because they knew that it couldn't potentially reach out to the creators of the model. So again, I'm not saying everything's perfect and everything is great, but there are a lot of technical controls, and those will increase over time. We have a number of these services we call zero operator access services, where we even contractually bind ourselves to the idea that if you use this EC2 Nitro system that does the GPU access, we literally cannot ever see unencrypted data that you give to us and then you use in our compute platform. And that's certainly an industry trend is to create isolation. Now it's very frustrating for law enforcement, by the way, because they ask for things that we literally can't give. But there's every other part of government, and all our enterprise customers are very happy with that answer, right? So.
All right, I think we're in agreement, and I think
I would just say that Mark's point about the autonomous cars was really well. You may have seen the recent data that's been published by Waymo about both the incidence of accidents, but also the severity of accidents. And I think on both measures, the Waymo is outperforming, which is interesting. But to your point, it's the combination both of the probability that there's an accident, but also how severe are the accidents. And apparently, both lower probability, but also the severity is lower as well.
The same is true of this trucking. Absolutely. There's no question about it.
All right, wonderful. Please join me in thanking our panelists one more time.